So thank you very much for joining us today for this conference, and thank you for the Nest Institute for organizing this and also for inviting me to host this panel on looking for common patterns in European countries when it comes to strategic corruption. My name is Iveta Kupková, and I will lead this panel today. But I will ask first our distinguished guests to introduce themselves. As you can see, we have here some with us and some online. So please first, Oksana Huss.
Hello, добрый день. Happy to be here with you online. I'm sorry I cannot be in person there. My name is Oksana Huss, and I co-founded the Interdisciplinary Corruption Research Network, so I'm working on issues of corruption and anti-corruption for many, many years. And maybe how I came across the topic of strategic corruption. I'm originally Ukrainian. I live and work in Germany. And when the Russian full-scale invasion started on Thursday, it was February 2022, already on Sunday with the network, Niels Kurbis and Chris Starke, they produced the podcast on the question how corruption is related with the Russian invasion. And this is where Joseph Porska-Alvarez and me, we first cooperated on the issue of strategic corruption. So I'm happy to share some insights from the backward perspective, but also what I'm experiencing now also in terms of security while working at the NATO Defense College.
Thank you very much. Nedim, we heard a great keynote speech from you, but please also introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a researcher at the University of Oslo, working on various corruption topics, but also on EU enlargement and Western Balkans law and politics. I worked on this topic of strategic corruption together with Oksana, Joseph, and Bertram Lang, and I contribute to various policy and law journals. Earlier, I worked primarily in the Balkan countries as a good governance advisor, and I worked with USAID, OSCE, and other international organizations present in the region.
Thank you very much. And here we have General Pavel Macko.
Good morning, everyone, and best regards also to those online. Thank you for having me here. I'm former Deputy Chief of Defense Staff in Slovakia, but also with vast experience in working in NATO headquarters. At the moment, I'm Defense and Security Analyst. I'm not an expert directly on the strategic corruption. I see strategic corruption as part of the broader spectrum of hybrid threats. Recently, I do cooperate with GlobSec as member of the Future Defense and Security Council, and recently I'm also affiliated with Allied Reform and expert support to Commander-in-Chief General Syrský in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And András Rácz.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. My name is András Rácz. I have actually two workplaces, the German Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin and the Corvinus University in Budapest, meaning I'm commuting between the two capitals. In case you need to hear bad stories about Wizz Air and Ryanair while commuting, I know all of them. I'm not a corruption expert either. I'm a Russia-Ukraine nerd. Since the beginning of the full-scale war, I regularly travel to Ukraine, including frontline. At present, I'm at 154 days spent in Ukraine. So what I'm trying to contribute with is a few examples about how corruption can have strategic effect. And I'm very happy and honored to be in the same panel, particularly with Oksana Huss and General Macko. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. And I am not a strategic corruption expert either. But I was with Globsec when we had the very first project focused on hybrid threats in Slovakia. And by the time we also published an analysis on strategic corruption together with Transparency International Slovakia. Later I moved to the Government Office of the Slovak Republic to lead analytical unit focusing on security. And now I am a freelancing, supporting experts and communities dealing with hybrid threats. So not an expert on strategic corruption, but still I'm here. Welcome again. And I would like to open the panel with the common question for each of you. So I would like to hear from all of you that when you look at your region or at your country, which mechanisms are the most common here, or what kind of strategic corruption is usually present, if any? Oksana, if you can start again.
Happy to start with that, thank you. Well, first of all, what is specific when we speak about strategic corruption in Ukraine and we see Russia as a perpetrator country, that the purpose of corruption, and this makes it different from conventional corruption, the purpose is to undermine the statehood. So in general, in other countries, this is foreign interference, mainly to manipulate the state. But in Ukraine, it has even a deeper purpose, as we see since the full-scale invasion, that this is undermining the statehood. And in 2024, I was working at OECD, and OECD published the Integrity Outlook of 2024, where they also elaborated on strategic corruption. And the definition we used back then, it was that strategic corruption is weaponization of loopholes in target countries' integrity systems to undermine the statehood or reach strategic goals of the perpetrators or aggressor country. Which means that the responsibility for strategic corruption is not only with the aggressor country, but it's also in the domestic system. So to state briefly, if something does not work in a peacetime, if there is an aggressor, will exploit it even more in this system. So with that introduction and with that understanding, I would highlight as the most common pattern of corruption, this is the political instruments. And that will be elections, and there will be political parties or individuals who are already in the public offices. Why is it the most important one? Because in Ukraine until 2022, we had in the parliament political parties openly and directly associated with Russia. So basically, even personal connections through Medvedchuk, who used to be, or who is father-in-law of Putin's child, basically he was leading a political party that was influencing legislation in Ukraine in the parliament, and it was only 2022 that Ukraine managed to prohibit this form. The second form I would like to highlight, that this is less obvious, this is economic interference. And in economy, usually the states, they do have some level of protectionism, especially in the critical infrastructure or in critical economic fields. So basically, to interfere, you need a layer of corruption to use to reach your purposes. And the famous case is of Russian oligarch Deripaska, who is very well known in aluminium production because he was managing large companies that have assets in aluminium production, the biggest in the world. And he bought basically Ukrainian aluminium production through years since Ukraine's independence. And then he just let it erode, which means that the critical production industry in Ukraine was destroyed in economic terms. And we can speculate backwards, was it strategic or not, if this oligarch was very close to Putin and very supportive to the system. And the third form or third way of interference through corruption, there will be a discursive one. Again, as I mentioned, strategic corruption exploits loopholes in integrity systems in domestic countries. So in Ukraine, there were many loopholes in the system for different reasons. Russia managed to use it for cognitive warfare to undermine support to Ukraine from other countries and to widespread the image of Ukraine as a corrupt country. And sometimes this is for objective reasons to refer just to a case of corruption, but sometimes we see the more AI is used for mis and disinformation, we see different patterns, how automatic messaging comes up, for example, in a major energy crisis now in winter when Russia was shelling energy systems. There is an analysis from Ukrainian think tanks showing that there were patterns, very systematic ones, that as soon as someone is writing something on the social media about the problem, the bots, they are basically commenting and referring to corruption in the energy system. So it's one thing when the society is reflecting critically on corruption as a problem, as a domestic issue to solve, but another thing is when we definitely see that this is weaponized and used for these terms. So yeah, I will stop here and happy to elaborate in the next question.
Thank you very much, Oksana. I would like to also remind everyone that we have Slido here. So if you are interested in asking something our guests, please do so. You can find a QR code on the conference program and you can ask there. Thank you. Now, Nedim, same question to you. What kind of strategic corruption can we see in your region?
Well, sort of the traditional form that you can always go back to reliably is energy dependency. And it's energy dependency on Russia and energy dependency that has to do with construction of pipelines and their management in Serbia and Bulgaria, and lately also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where the deal, unfortunately, to get rid of dependency on Russia and to start procuring the LNG from US and other suppliers through a construction of a new pipeline that would connect Croatia and Bosnia, which is a very good idea and a worthy idea, has been undermined by a selection of the company that has strong relationship towards Russian-sponsored, Russian-backed secessionists in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Connections with that company are so strong that basically it has been built into law, a lex specialis, which was drafted practically to allow that particular company to be a part of the procurement project. Moreover, I would like to say that the very lax standards regarding money laundering prevention and very diverging standards where you know the law enforcement authorities try to crack down on ordinary citizens which may have stashed some 10 or 15,000 euros, which they slowly try to inject into the system using their own bank account. And, these people get penalized. Whereas people who have done so much, whereas large infrastructure, whereas large projects of urban building in various urban areas in Bosnia and Herzegovina go on and carry on under very suspicious circumstances, making one wonder where is all this money coming from? Are these perhaps proceeds of organized crime? And how come that, the word on the street is that these buildings that are often built against any, against any urban planning standards are often identified in vernacular as being made through money laundering. So this is something where we see very uneven standards of implementation. These two areas need to be particularly highlighted: enforcement of money laundering, and then the energy dependency from various actors. This is something that Balkans heavily struggles with.
Thank you very much. Now, Pavel, to you. In Slovakia, we already know that there is no corruption in the highest state levels. But how about strategic corruption here?
On the highest level, yes.
On whichever level.
Before I touch that, I would like to explain maybe in one or two sentences where I'm coming from. You know, strategic corruption is probably the most gray area of potential hybrid activities. If I talk in general terms on hybrid activities, I always remind everyone that we need to differentiate between what is deliberate activity of an actor who is launching those activities, what is just misinformation being spread, and then the stupid conspiracies and stupidity just broadly spread on the social networks. Similar thing is with the strategic corruption. If I look at what's going on in Slovakia, you could find some patterns, but yet it's difficult to prove the regular corruption. It's difficult to prosecute it. So we know it, we smell it, we see the outcomes of it, but it's so hard to prosecute it. If we talk about strategic corruption, I always see it like with the hybrid activities, something which is deliberate, which has strategic aim, strategic objectives, and is perpetrated by some foreign power. So it's activity which is targeted to undermine the nation's ability to take proper decisions, to utilize the deficiencies of the system within the nation and make it dependent on the attackers' tools and measures. So, in general terms, strategic corruption, I would talk about strategic corruption by only when it is really not about money, obviously. It's corruption, so it's money involved always in it. But when it is targeted to undermine the freedom of action, if I use military terminology, freedom of action of the targeted nation. Now, look at Slovakia. So we are a relatively small but very open economy within the European Union, within NATO, and both organizations are based on consensus. Now, the patterns, because that's your question. So if you look at Slovakia, regardless of all the measures, and including assisting the other nations, Slovakia is still significantly dependent on energies on Russia. So it's vulnerable. So that's very, very strategic vulnerability. Second, Slovakia is vulnerable also to cognitive warfare, basically dismantling all the organizations, giving floor to, organizations fighting misinformation or fact-checking. That's all gone. So we have no sanity mechanisms at the moment, real one. So, but actually, it's even more difficult as the government officials, political masters are actually promoting and even financing from state budget the disinformation media, and at the same time giving floor to foreign propaganda. And third pattern or layer, which are all interconnected, is undermining the institutions which should prevent corruption, which should provide proper functioning of the state and its institutions. It's like anti-corruption law completely changed, undermined, anti-corruption bodies, prosecution, investigation bureaus undermined, intelligence services taken over by the political control and compromised. Well, they may not be penetrated to the extent we might see, but at least the perception based on what we see and what they communicate and who is leading them, it's giving such a picture. And obviously now we see attacks on other areas like Supreme Audit Office, because that's the office which should control how we spend our public money, the office of the public procurement, and so on. So in three major pillars, if I repeat that and conclude it, first, our strategic vulnerabilities and dependencies on the energy resources. Second, it's media and our vulnerability to cognitive warfare, including monopolization of some media. Our media market is very small. And if you listen that some oligarchs are already buying, or some of them already have bought influential media, at the same time the state is supporting the disinformation media and pro-Russian media. And third one is again undermining all the institutions which should be like independent state bodies to make sure that we properly spend our public money.
Thank you very much. And András, also to you the same question.
Thank you. When it comes to strategic corruption, it's actually interesting. It never starts strategic. And just to give you kind of insights, unfortunately not from the receiving end, only from the scholar end, how our Russian friends have been doing this. How do we know how they are doing this? First and foremost, there are quite many old textbooks and manuals from the KGB and also from the 1990s actually published. Second, there are dozens of memoirs of former Russian KGB agents, GRU operatives, published, and those guys wrote about their careers, how they have recruited people, how they convinced people to cooperate with the Soviet Union and later with the Russian Federation. Plus, of course, we have counterintelligence reports published from our Baltic allies, from our Polish allies, Czech allies, and a number of other countries. So how the Russians are doing it? It never starts strategic. It always starts small scale. They call it, if we translate, they call it priming. The first one, just a nice invitation to a dinner. First, just a lunch, informal. Thereafter, more expensive kind of a dinner. Thereafter, possibly small presents to test your integrity. Whether you are ready to accept a present. Whether you are ready to accept a bit bigger present. And thereafter comes usually the first consultation contract. You know, I have a friend in the consultancy business. If you happen to know General Macko, for example, we could sell very good papers about Slovakia NATO integration. Nothing specific. It's not about the content. It's about testing your integrity. And it's about making you dependent on the extra money you earn. You start spending a bit more than what you earn. So you start becoming dependent on this cooperation with your Russian diplomat friend. And that's how it goes on and on and on. And they are not in a hurry. Why? Because they document everything. Once you make a mistake, you are hooked until the end of your life. The time span, colleagues, is different. Strategic corruption never starts that you suddenly become a German chancellor and you got a contract from Gazprom. By then, you have been usually primed, sometimes for decades. They don't hurry anywhere. The time span is different. And while all intelligence services are bound by the regulation of collecting information only to the purpose, and every other information which was collected but not connected to the given case has to be destroyed, Russians are not bound by this kind of restrictions. They keep collecting information, they keep priming, testing, mapping a person until the end of the person's life. So we shall not start looking for strategic corruption. Because once it becomes strategic for the given person, it's already too late. General Macko is absolutely right. We need to start looking for priming. We need to find the examples when people from the neighboring embassies start priming or university students or young experts or young soldiers. Because that's the moment you can still catch it. Once it becomes strategic, it's way too late. And to Iveta's concrete question, finally to answer, you asked about the most common forms of strategic corruption. Here I would differentiate. Where the most money is, and as Dr. Hogić already said, the most money traditionally, no surprise, energy trade. That's where the real money is. Before the full-scale war, the most effect of strategic corruption manifested in something which the Russian political terminology calls Schröderization. Yes, from the name of Gerhard Schröder, it became actually a Russian common word, Schröderizatia. When you hire a former politician, give him or her, look at Karin Kneißl, give him or her lucrative positions in boards of state companies, earning loads of money with not that much work, so making the given politician dependent on that. Fun fact, Russians call it Schröderizatia, even though it was only Gerhard Schröder from the German top political leadership back then. From Austria, depending on how we count, 3 or 4 former chancellors, foreign ministers, of a lot more Austrians have been caught in that story than high-ranking Germans. Still the name is Schröderizatia. And this has had the most effect. And as already just said by Dr. Hogić, these people have the ability, and also as Oksana said, these people have the ability to influence the very legislation. So you don't need to break the rules anymore. You shape the rules. That's a different type of power. And when it comes nowadays in the context of the war, the full-scale war, the most frequent type of corruption, it's small-scale, colleagues. People hired through Telegram, people hired through social media networks for a simple job, for a one-off type of thing. You carry a backpack here, you carry a package here, you paint a graffiti there. The usual price is $500, sometimes $1,000. These things has been happening in the scale of hundreds, possibly thousands. Russians call it one-off assets. So you hire a person online for a very simple task, and if the person gets caught, and usually the person gets caught because he's not trained. So he's painting a graffiti while there are security cameras, of course we capture them. So, but if the person gets caught, Russia doesn't care because there is no direct trace. The person was hired online. This thing has been happening in the scale of hundreds all across Europe. Recently, Polish colleagues from the Defense 24 PL team with Alexander Olech and his team published a 140 pages report about Russian hybrid attacks against Poland. It was published like last week. Russian hybrid attacks against Poland, and they give a detailed account also how Russians used this very simple one-off assets. It's not a happy read, but I highly recommend it because this is, to answer Iveta's question, the most frequently happening type of corruption regarding Russia. People usually get paid either via bank accounts or crypto, earlier Western Union, but for them it's not safe anymore. In these individual cases alone do not have a strategic effect. But when dozens of them are happening, particularly sabotage attacks, they may have a strategic effect. So in terms of frequency, in terms of numbers, this is the most common form. And just to sum it up, when it comes to awareness, it always takes 2 to get corrupted. It's not only the Russians' fault, it's also our fault. Somebody needs to take the money that is offered. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your observations, even from the point of view of the threat actor, actually. But now let's move to Oksana again, because I would like to ask you that according to your experience, which sectors would you consider the most vulnerable when we are talking about strategic communication? And does it even differ from country to country?
Many sectors were already listed, so we were talking about political one, political finance, about energy sector, about media mentioning. So I would like to follow up on what Mr. András just said, because he elaborated on very important mechanisms, how exactly the vulnerability in the political sector is exploited because of the loopholes in the domestic systems. And I just opened the new OECD Integrity Outlook from 2026. And OECD is measuring integrity systems in different parts. So if you look the comparison in legislation and implementation, so OECD is measuring not only laws, but also practice, how things are done with regards to integrity. You will see that exactly lobbying practices, they are the lowest across the OECD countries, both regulations and implementation. You will see also that conflict of interest practices, so what we heard before, small gifts, invitations, dinner here and dinner there, they are also following lobbying as the lowest level of implementation in the countries. So basically these are these gray zones where we are saying that security, economy and politics, they are separated. And then basically this is the way we are washing hands in the societies and saying, I'm operating in an economic field, so Schröder is saying this is mere economic interest of being in Gazprom, I'm not the chancellor anymore, so this is just personal thing and this is economic success. And basically giving this impression that everything is separated, and this is why if I'm acting upon economic system, it does not influence the political one, unless he has the office in the parliament and then all the influence continues to work. But this is basically these loopholes that are allowing this, and this is why I would like to spend time and highlight this type of strategic corruption that exploits political systems. And to contrast this, we saw in Moldova with the last elections, there was a lot of concern that pro-Russian parties will win these elections. And again, if you see the measurements by OECD, Moldova is one of the countries that has the best measures and the best indicators in political finance, both institutions and practice, which is very difficult to reach, because when democracies are having this thinking, well, this is politics, no one should interfere, political parties who are in the parliaments, they will not change the systems with regards to opening political finance. So there was a question in the beginning, what are the red flags? When we see the red flag, that political party is starting propagating and repeating Russian propaganda, or is meeting explicitly with Russian leadership, or actually the traces of political finance that some German political parties, or in other countries, in France we had this evidence. There was this evidence, but there were no legal instruments in these countries to shut down these political parties. And Moldova created this these institutional instruments to shut down this party, and we saw this result that Moldova was able to dismiss pro-Russian political party just before the elections. Because you know that during the elections, media are abused through propaganda. There are many techniques to bribe voters, so the possibility or the likelihood of this pro-Russian party that is playing not a fair game is much higher to win than all other countries in that competition. So I just want to highlight this, again, one point, that integrity systems, and especially with regard to political finance, lobbying, conflict of interest, those that we regard as something nice to have is in the past, they are becoming the center of security measures.
Thank you. We mentioned Moldova, and we will stay in Balkans for a little longer, because in this region we often see a combination of weak institutions, of foreign interference, and also domestic, let's say, enablers. Nedim, could you prove us, based on these cases, that strategic corruption is not only a matter of foreign interference?
Well, absolutely. I do think so. Many unresolved political questions in the Balkans, and the unwillingness of the EU to invest in them in a more substantial manner have created opportunities for strategic corruption, have created this sort of ambient where corruption is being invited, where this lobbying that Oksana spoke of is being seen as a manner of conducting international politics, but also as a defense of something that has already been acquired on the ground by local domestic enablers. conclude with foreign actors. But we see this also as a part of, we see this also through sanctioning that was done earlier. So, for example, when some Bosnian politicians were sanctioned, or Bulgarian politicians were sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department back in pre-Trump times, this was not done because they were part of, transnational kleptocratic network, rather because they were engaged in activities of domestic corruption that were so widespread that they were basically a threat to the domestic legal and political order. So we could say that what we are faced with in the Balkans is a domestically built environment that invites strategic corruption, and that constantly now, especially when the ambient for lobbying in the US has been so inviting, that wants to thrive on these international lobbying opportunities. So you cannot say that it was foreign interference that sort of created corruption opportunities in the Balkans, although there were several instances of such actions. But predominantly the modus operandi has been of that of domestic actors creating highly corrupt surroundings, which are now really excellent for inviting foreign corrupt influence. And this sort of goes well with what I've said previously regarding money laundering and the opportunities there, especially in the real estate sector. So, unfortunately, the opportunities are many in this area.
Thank you. And now we will move a bit to my favorite topic, which are hybrid threats. And from this point of view, András, would you say that strategic corruption is just another tool of hybrid threats, or is it worth it to look at the matter more precisely?
It is always worth it to look at it more precisely. Otherwise, us researchers will be unemployed, and that's bad. To be a bit more serious, colleagues, strategic corruption is an enabler. It's a tool. It's not an objective. You don't bribe somebody for the sake of bribing. You want somebody because you want to have an effect. I mean, to use military terminology, strategic corruption is an effector. You want to achieve something by it. And taking a look at how Russia is using this for the sake of hybrid operations, and not only hybrid. I mean, one can, in the context of the full-scale war, one can pretty clearly define what are Russia's priorities, what are the sectors they want to affect, using also strategic corruption by other means. Bit of theory. In the Russian military thinking and also Soviet military thinking, ever since the 1930s, the idea has been present that war starts long before actual combat actions do. Georgy Serson, 1937. So they keep priming the vulnerabilities and also the possible effectors long before actual fighting starts. But once fighting does start, and this is at the moment when we are where we are now, the priority is always the war and things that are serving the war effort. Meaning, where Russia is concentrating, first, of course, military targets, both in Ukraine and in the West. Military targets also include targets which are used for providing Ukraine with military support. Defense industry, ammunition depots, storage facilities, logistical routes, all that. So the key target is military. If you look at the patterns of these single small assets, whom Russia asks for doing several small favors, those are often concentrated actually around military industry and military facilities, because it's part of priming. So military itself is the first priority, directly the military. In the beginning of the full-scale invasion, they've been using thousands of operatives trying to collect information about the movement of Ukraine's military forces location of troops, location of command posts, all that. By now, this is largely gone, also because Ukraine improved a lot in terms of operational security, in terms of awareness to operational security. So again, going back to the priority list, first one, military. Second, military industry, both in Ukraine and abroad. Third, infrastructure. Infrastructure that may be used also for military purposes, communication, energy, roads, railways, because for military tasks we need to transport heavy things. So infrastructure, and thereafter comes society, both the Ukrainian society and also the Western society. Based on how they have been acting and based on their own military literature, how they are thinking about this form of warfare, they call it the new generation warfare, one can clearly map out their thinking about the priorities. I can highly recommend, for example, Christian Jojart from the Swedish Defense University, one of the best scholars on contemporary Russian thinking on this form of warfare, or again from Sweden, Gudrun Persson. So there is a lot of literature one can rely upon besides mapping out the actual field activities. And just one more thing, I would like to 200% second what Oksana said, lobbying as a gray zone. Gray zone are the opportunities. Gray zone are, if you have you seen the Game of Thrones, Littlefinger, chaos is a ladder. Gray zone is a ladder on which you can climb. It's actually our task to regulate those gray zones and make them less gray.
Thank you very much. Before I will ask Pavel another question, I would like to again remind you that we have Slido. You can find the QR code in the conference program, so you can also ask our panelists, and we will move to your questions shortly after this one. But Pavel, let's maybe now talk about the point of view of state as targets, and if they are willing to a possible defending states. So which institutions should be most likely the first to spot that strategic corruption is happening? And what can those states do to either improve their resilience or to make strategic corruption more difficult to operate?
That's a tough one, but okay, let's try it. First, if you look at what we were talking until now, it's interest of the one who tries to influence your decision making, tries to influence your ability to object his activities. For example, in our case now, our ability to support Ukraine, for example, when Russia is conducting war. So if you look at how Russians are doing, not only Russians, it's more general. If you look at the strategic corruption as part of something broader, which is working in gray zone and basically feeding the permanent conflict, priming, preparing the ground, it's like military campaign planning. I mean the strategic campaign, not the short one, not the battle, but the war, long-term war, where eventually you have your objectives. So in order to counter that, first I would start with intelligence services. Intelligence services are our eyes and ears. They should, well, they will not intercept everything, but they should prime as well. So they should be able to find our strategic vulnerabilities, but also the actors who are trying to utilize them and the mechanisms, how they try to do that. Now, this is very important. You look, when I'm reading, like the Dutch reports, the Finnish reports, the Czech reports, if I look at the NATO level, András was mentioning the recent Adam Olech report, but I look back 1.5 years, intelligence community on the NATO level have brought in December 2024 information about potential 500 attacks. So it was not out of blue, it was not just guessing, it was like we might have 500 events which were directly targeted to our vulnerabilities within NATO nations. 100 of them we can definitely attribute to Russians, the rest we suspect them, but we cannot prove it by the forensic measures. But we see all the other elements of the puzzle, which is linking it with Russians and which is linking it with Russian objectives. So intelligence services have to be efficient, but they start again with integrity. If we have problem back at home with questioning the integrity of the intelligence services leadership, and I still believe in our service, in Slovak services, we have very professional people, but we have also the seams and loopholes in them, and they could be politically manipulated and they could be vulnerable. Second thing is, it's like a sanitation mechanism. That means those state institutions, once you have problems, starting from the small one, starting from the small corruption, which eventually may or may not turn to strategic corruption, then it's proper, independent investigation, prosecution, and judicial system. Those are keystones. Because you might find out that, okay, we are vulnerable, we are subject of strategic corruption, political parties might be financed illegally, but if you don't have law on it, and if you don't have then the enforcement mechanism which can sanitize that, so it's just, you can just state, okay, we have problem, but that's it. So, I mean, prosecution, investigation, prosecution, judicial system should be immunized, without political influence, independent, and should stick to the rules which we establish. And we have serious deficit here in Slovakia with that. We have permanent ongoing discussion, starting from the independent Slovakia, Harabin's time being chief of or head of the Supreme Court, and then later Minister of Justice. But he has created like a layer within the system. We have seen a huge amount of real cases, criminal cases. So now when you look what is happening, those who are accused or linked somehow to those who were actually prosecuted try to manipulate the system, change the law, influence the mechanisms, this organization, that means intelligence system, all these other three. I already mentioned in my previous remarks, the third layer is enforcement mechanism, which is guaranteeing the fair execution of the public service, fair execution of fair use of public money, which is like Supreme Audit Office, which is the public procurement office, and some oversight of media. We have breached now into the oversight bodies for media, for public media, where actually the political nominees and sometimes very controversial are already on board. So basically, if all these three layers don't work properly, you are running the risk that actually perpetrators of this corruption, or those who are vulnerable to strategic corruption, capture the state. They manipulate the state, they capture it, and then eventually they change the rules, as Dr. Hogić said, that then they eventually change the rules the way that actually nothing is wrong. We are just in line with the law because law says this is possible. So to close it, if you look few things, is it normal when we talk about strategic partnership with Vietnam? We have case opened in Germany. We have known case in Slovakia. Prime Minister travels to Vietnam, talks about our strategic partnership, and we are talking about nation which actually our export to that nation is 0.1% of our all export. So what makes a person on a high political position to act like that and to so disproportionately claim the strategic partnership with Vietnam? At the same time, we have suspicion that our state bodies knew about the hijacking of or extraction of the Vietnamese citizen. So it's just a rhetoric question. Don't even try to answer it. So real issue is, unless we make professional police investigation, professional and unbiased prosecution, judicial system, and then those observing bodies, it would be very difficult to prevent. We will be always dependent at this stage. I'm afraid we are in mutual dependency because those who are suspected to be subject of strategic corruption are already dependent also on their links with those who might be initiators of the strategic corruption. But the reason is it was instilled here. They grown up from regular, if we may say, from sort of regular corruption, but eventually the only escape for them is strategic corruption.
Please.
Just one short thing to add. I'm a historian. I love reading history books. In 1978, there was a KGB operative named Stanislav Levchenko who deserted from Japan, fled to the United States, and he wrote a book. And what General Macko said about awareness and intelligence, there's a quote from that book. Levchenko openly wrote, "Look where your vulnerabilities are, and there you find the KGB." This is how they have been thinking for decades. That's why awareness is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Pavel, you mentioned difficult questions, so let's move to Slido. And here we have a question. What is the best approach to explain public what is wrong and what is behind red line? How to set public interest in strategic corruption? Who would like to answer this question? Please, Oksana.
I would address this question from a different perspective because, again, we are separating the strategic corruption, which is normal corruption, but in legal terms, this is what we would call aggravating circumstance, that there must be an institutional system in place that is punished by public opinion, that is punished legally for any type of corruption. And if this corruption is done in interest of foreign state, then it is even more an issue and a problem. And one risk we are running here, that one of securitization, that intelligence services must deal with the issue. And this is something Ukraine faced in 2022 when Ukrainians saw the real life of Russians. And there was this idea to indeed proclaim corruption as a security issue so that secret services would deal with that. The society resisted that idea massively, because secret services are not accountable to the public because of the secret that they are having, which is a logical thing. So in Ukraine, it's not only that specialized anti-corruption agencies are dealing with corruption, but even sanctions, economic sanctions and assets confiscation from Russian oligarchs or Russian actors in Ukraine. It is under the jurisdiction of the High Anti-Corruption Court, which is a specialized institution, specialized court, independent court in Ukrainian court system. And I would like to highlight this question because this is a very important one, because the person who is asking is shifting the focus on the society and the role of the society. And in the introduction, in the remarks, Mr. Zahoran mentioned resilience as a term. In NATO starts now slowly working with the concept of layered resilience, that we have military forces who are the core, of course, in war. But then you have a civil layer of resilience. This is all the critical infrastructure, public services, public institutions that are there and that must be intact, who support military. And now what is new coming in NATO more and more, this recognition of the societal resilience, where society is becoming alphabetic in security issues. So basically this sense, this wisdom in this common sense that is having about that society is having about the link between politics, economy, and security again, and acting in its agency to counteract it. And the society will find a way how to do that. It's just about not to block the information and not to censor information with the hope that society could be scared or could be frightened or panic or do some stupid political decisions in the elections if they know that we are actually not anymore in peace.
Pavel, would you like to react?
Just a quick one, and I would fully agree with what Oksana just said. This conference is actually part of that answer. It's not just, I would be against securitization in terms that it's intelligence agencies which would have to deal. They are just eyes and ears, that's it. So it's always the whole of the society approach. That means all layers, even at war, the defense is not, we see it in Ukraine, is not, it is important on the military level, but it is not vested in the military layer. Actually, the resilience, I mean, the national will, and ability to reproduce the power, ability to continue the daily life, that's what makes Ukraine strong, not the military. Well, I don't want to undermine the military, but it's not just the military. So the same is with this. We need a general approach. So building strong civil society, it's part of our defense against strategic corruption. That means people should not accept it.
And I'm actually, ever since Iveta asked the question, I keep contemplating, actually, why is it so bad to get corrupted? Anyways, you get rich quickly, right? It's nice. So I'm trying to come up with counter-arguments, and so far I'm also teaching at university, economic university, sometimes students with very rich background. So instead of moral arguments, it's not my profession anyways, instead of moral arguments, so far I managed to come up by two very practical arguments. First, I mean, if everything can be done with money, it's actually nice as long as you have money, right? You can do everything. Comes the problem. What if somebody has more money than you? And then you have a problem. So first practical argument. Second, once you get corrupted, just once, you are vulnerable until the end of your life. They will never let you go. Anyways, why on earth would they let you go? It just makes no sense. It literally makes no sense. Once you establish the leverage, you keep using that leverage. Even if you promise the asset that, okay, from now you are free. Just this one last task and from then we let you go. We never let you go. It just makes no sense. So that's another argument. It's better not to take that first envelope.
Thank you very much. Another question on Slido is asking you that do countries that you represent provide integrity trainings for public officials, and how to measure the effectiveness of such trainings? Are there any trainings like this in your country for public officials?
So, I mean, there are obviously anti-corruption trainings in the Balkans countries, and the capacities in that sense have been growing. However, I worry there that it's actually the national security agencies that are lagging behind in trainings and in at least any transparency or production of strategic documents that would inform us or inform them what their policy guidance is and how they are working on these issues. So in that sense, I would say the Balkans is very much lagging behind. Also, the trainings for public officials outside of the intelligence and security area need really to be updated to take care about, to consider all of these issues that we have raised today. Currently, these are trainings focused on the economic aspect of corruption. You could say on fraud, more generally on fraud in public procurement. So in that sense, they have various so-called integrity plans, which were modeled after experiences from the Netherlands and Slovenia, but which are now sort of, they're good for economic efficiency, but I don't think they're enough in this area, in this moment.
I'm not sure whether I will speak for the Slovakia, but my personal impression is we have very limited level of training. We have good papers, very limited training. We have almost no training on values and ethics. By the way, when I studied in the US, that was part of my credited program. So it was not just you need to participate, there were credits for that. And we had good examples. So I think this is completely missing. And then the real execution in life, it's even worse, because basically we are pushing through, or at least some areas, and some people and some leaders are pushing through that it's normal. It's normal. So we make the corruption normal. So we might be catching small corruption, I mean taking chocolate at the ambulance, but we don't have strategic big corruption. We are not questioning people why they are taking decisions. You cannot procure, and maybe there is zero corruption in it, but there will be always question. You cannot travel abroad within 1 week, take decision to build a nuclear power station for 15 to 30 billion euros, and not willing to answer even the journalist's question, why did you do so, did you make your due diligence, and so on. So that's the problem. So no, I believe in reality it's very, very formal and very limited and close to none.
Thank you. I'm certainly not representing Russia. So how they are doing it on that side? In the 1990s, they tried to introduce anti-corruption standards and trainings and norms and ethics, but it never really functioned. There are important differences. For example, the Moscow state administration or Yekaterinburg, even St. Petersburg, is a lot better than countryside cities. But as the general already said, they keep prosecuting small corruption. An envelope with 5,000 rubles, a chocolate, a glass of wine, that's a problem. If the governor's cousin wants to build a real estate, some kind of a new housing project, that's not corruption, that's economic development. So they don't really prosecute the big fish. So most recently, particularly since the full-scale war, even these kind of formal corruption trainings have practically disappeared, also because the contrast between the reality and the official papers and the norms and the contrast between the norms and the reality have just become way too apparent. It's easier not even trying to pretend. So that's the sad reality and on the Russian side of the border.
András, you don't represent Russia here, but this might be a question for you.
Хорошо.
How much are Russia's strategic corruption activities and schemes part of the plan with concrete goals, or is it rather opportunity-driven activities? So Russia, do they have a plan, or they are just using what is offered?
That's a false dilemma. Both. It's not an either-or choice, it's both. In some cases, there have been plans. And some cases, plans have been there for decades. My home country, Hungary, in that case, how Russia has established long-lasting networks. This has been planned already in the 1980s. They know exactly. Hungary is not a Slavic country, not a Slavic people, not a Slavic language. Mutual history is at least troubled. No common border, no Hungarian minority in Russia, no Russian minority in Hungary. So there is not much to build any kind of soft power upon. They have realized it already in the late 1980s. And ever since, what they have been doing vis-à-vis Hungary is not trying to win hearts and minds. There is nothing to build upon. There is no pro-Russian political tradition like in Czechia, like in some of the Baltic countries, or like in Bulgaria. So instead of trying to win hearts and minds, anyways doomed to fail, they have been doing two things, but very consistently. First, strategic investments in the energy sphere. Because once you can secure a nuclear power plant, a long-term gas delivery contract, this guarantees you lasting influence regardless of who is on power. So strategic investments and elite capture. And they have been remarkably successful in capturing subsequent layers, subsequent generations of the Hungarian political elites. Some of the elite capture dates back to the late 1980s, including elements of the democratic opposition back then. And they have had a very deep understanding of the society, and they still have the deep understanding of the society. So part of it is actually long-term planned. And there have also been occasional corruption stories. Give you a recent one. The capital city, Budapest, decided to procure, like a decade ago, decided to procure new cars for the underground, for the metro, for the subway. There were several contenders, and Russia's secret services actively involved and influenced the decision-making. So finally, instead of a similarly competitive Estonian offer, Budapest finally chose to procure Russian cars for the subway. Even though those Russian railway cars, were of much more inferior design, still the decision was taken that let's buy those ones, nearly at the same price like new Western-made railway cars could have been procured. This was an occasional thing. This was not long-term planned. There is a tender. Okay, little Hungarians want to buy new railway cars. Good, here we go in. So some of it is long-term planned. Some of it is really ad hoc. So I think one shall not make an artificial choice between the two. It's always both.
Thank you. And since we are approaching the end of this panel, I would like to all ask you for the last remarks. And since we were looking for common patterns in European countries, based on what we heard today during our panel, is strategic corruption in Europe more of a series of national stories, or do we already see common patterns here? And if we do, what is the most striking feature for you? Oksana, can we start with you?
Yes. Yeah, thanks for summary and for this discussion. Well, to conclude, I will conclude again with the institutional and political corruption to focus on that. I think this is a striking pattern that is common to all the countries. Most of the extreme right, far left parties, they are somehow associated with Russia, because this is something that is weakening the EU, weakening the states, and this is something very easy to manipulate in a discourse through media, through disinformation, because the support is very emotional and not really objective. So this is a vulnerability definitely common to most of the countries. Then economic sector and energy, something that was built through years, as was mentioned by most of the speakers. And finally, the societies in a cognitive warfare through manipulation and use of corruption to actually undermine trust to politicians. So corruption is not a fact, but corruption is a story, is a narrative to undermine the trust to the governments in the societies. And you were asking about the literacy and kind of trainings for the society, and here I would like to mention that in Ukraine, the National Agency for Corruption Prevention has very small but very important project where they work with the Ministry of Education and actually integrate ethics and integrity into school books, for example, in the math. That you study math and you are not preached on ethics, but the small math tasks, they involve principles of fairness, of sharing, or the same in the literature or in writing. So this is about society. But when we are talking about elite capture, the colleagues also mentioned, then this education does not help anymore, and something more is needed. And this is what in Ukraine the specialized and independent system of anti-corruption authorities is responsible for investigating and working on the cases, so making justice in the cases of high political corruption. And this all must be really carefully balanced with the information manipulation around that, because then we are having very quickly a paradox effect that corruption is revealed, high-level corruption is revealed, actually good thing is done, but then the swamp of information is coming to also to help to manipulate it into the way that helps Russia to undermine trust in the society. So this is a very complex system where we need to recognize that security, economy, and politics, they are connected. We cannot think them separately. And in these layers of society, in every layer of society, of societal resilience, in the military, in civil and societal one, we need to think of integrity as the core value to define jointly.
Yes, thank you very much, and also thank you for sharing more about the Ukrainian trainings. Nedim, what is your point of view on common European patterns?
So I think that actually now it's more of a series of national stories. And here's why. We had, for example, in the past a number of attempts to infiltrate political and societal systems through funding of NGOs, funding of individuals that would create NGOs, and illicit funding of political parties. And we have seen this, taking again Russia as the example, we have seen this in France, in Italy, in Germany, and in some other countries. But now I feel like the strategies are becoming diverse and more different in order to target each country individually. So I think that actually we don't fully know what's going on, and I feel that more investigation and more events like these and more research and experience should be shared, and perhaps it is shared at the national intelligence level through cooperation, just we don't know about this. But at least I feel that it's more of a series of national stories now, how infiltration through strategic corruption wants to happen, rather than one strategy that could work for each country individually. So what I would like to see is more attention being paid to this and more information sharing.
Thank you. Pavel, last words on common features?
I would agree with Medin. The problem is that the nature of strategic corruption and the nature of hybrid activities as such, it's so flexible and individual. So it uses your vulnerabilities, and it has very specific adaptable targeting. So what is common is methodology. Methodology is more or less common, but the targets and then the appearance of these events might be very different, because it is tailored to the very specific nation, to its wounds, to its vulnerabilities, to its loopholes. So from this point of view, I would really say this is more a set of national issues, but they are connected all by the objectives and by the methodology. So methodology and objectives are the same to gain the influence. And if I look then how they are, from methodology point of view, and András already mentioned it a little bit, it's like a military campaign planning. That means there is always element of priming or training to identify. That means intelligence. Then is searching for entry point. Then is developing the dependence. Then is exploiting the dependence. Eventually, is really capturing the state. So it doesn't matter which angle you come to. You utilize what is there, and you try to explore on that and further develop on, in military terminology, further develop your success where it is applicable. So in Slovakia, you might have, for example, minorities, you would use that one. Or if you have deficiency in infrastructure, you would use that area, while in Germany, you might address completely different grievances within the society, or vulnerabilities. So I would start with vulnerabilities and adaptation to them. That's what is common.
Thank you, András.
Thank you.
National stories or common patterns?
And I'm in the lucky situation to directly continue what Dr. Hogić said, and also General Macko. The strategy of our adversary is basically the same, but the tactics is increasingly complicated, increasingly individualized. They are very good in learning, they are very good in adapting themselves. And they have different country strategies for Western European countries, for the Nordics, for the South, for us Central Europeans. So here there is no unified tactics, the strategic objectives are the same, and they go individual. Which leads to the question how to counter that. And also to continue what Dr. Hogić said, information sharing would be important, and not only about the success stories. We all love to speak about success stories, how we caught the Russians on time, how we prevented corruption. But the real lessons to learn are in the failures. We need to speak also about not the best practices, what everybody loves to speak about, but the failures, where they penetrated us. And yes, it's inconvenient, so perhaps we shall not speak about these things publicly, but we need to learn from our failures. We need to discuss the cases where our shields were not strong enough, or awareness mechanisms were not strong enough, and yes, they managed to get in. Because these are the lessons to learn in reality. And one more thing, kind of a warning, kind of a red flag. You are all specialists, so one can ask such questions. To continue Levchenko, look at the vulnerabilities. What are those vulnerabilities of our countries which are evidently there, but Russia has not utilized them so far? And why not? Think about it. For example, in my own home country, one of an evident societal vulnerability is the situation of the unintegrated minorities, mostly the Roma population. We know that Russians are aware of the problem. We know that they are financing militant far-right groups, but they have never ever tried to utilize this to ignite tensions. Comes the question why. Option number one, they are idiots. Option number two, they keep this thing in reserve. They keep this thing for the time when the need comes. For example, a full-scale NATO-Russia conflict. So I would encourage all of you to think of the evident vulnerabilities which our adversaries are not using, and ask the question, why not? Because this may lead to inconvenient conclusions, hopefully also improving our resilience on the longer run. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and this is the end of our panel. So I would like to thank you for being here with us, and also to thank our panelists Oksana Huss, Nedim Hogić, Pavel Macko, and András Rácz.